The carriage wheels ground against the cobblestones of Mayfair with a rhythm that matched the steady beat of vengeance in Alexander Blackwood's chest. The Duke of Hawthorne had crossed half of England to reach this address, this house, this family that had haunted his nights for far too many years. The leather portfolio on the seat beside him contained everything he needed: letters, ledgers, testimonies from witnesses who had finally agreed to speak, evidence that would destroy the Ashford name, as thoroughly as they had attempted to destroy his. Rain streaked down the carriage windows, blurring the elegant facades of London's finest neighbourhood into watercolour impressions of wealth and privilege. How fitting that even the heavens wept on this day, though whether in sorrow or anticipation, Alexander could not say. He had waited so long for this moment that he scarcely recognized the man he had become, harder, colder, driven by a singular purpose that had consumed every other ambition he might have harbored. The Duke of Hawthorne swore that no lie, no scandal, and no name from that family would remain unpunished. For years, the shadow of an ancient betrayal had followed him, and now he had enough evidence to destroy all those responsible. His father had died in disgrace, his reputation shredded by lies, orchestrated by Lord Ashford and his corrupt business partners. Alexander had been too young then to defend his father's honor, but he was no longer that powerless boy. Now he held the power to bring down an entire dynasty. The carriage lurked to a halt before an imposing townhouse of pale stone and black iron. Through the rain, Alexander could see candlelight flickering in the windows, signs of life and comfort that seemed obscene, given what he knew of the corruption that dwelt within those walls. His driver opened the door, and Alexander descended into the London damp, his greatcoat billowing around him as he strode toward the entrance with the confidence of a man who knew his cause was just. The butler who answered his knock wore the expression of practiced indifference common to servants of the aristocracy, but Alexander detected the slight widening of the man's eyes when he presented his card. The Duke of Hawthorne was not unknown, and his presence at the Ashford residence would already be the subject of speculation below stairs. "His Grace, the Marquis of Ashford, is not currently receiving visitors," the butler began, but Alexander had no patience for such pleasantries. "He will receive me," Alexander said, his voice carrying the authority of generations of breeding and the steel of personal conviction. "Tell Lord Ashford that I have matters to discuss regarding his business dealings in Cornwall. He will understand the urgency." Cornwall. The word was calculated, chosen for maximum impact. Alexander watched with satisfaction as the butler's composure cracked ever so slightly. The man departed with instructions for Alexander to wait in the entrance hall, but the Duke had no intention of remaining confined to such a space. He moved deeper into the house, his footsteps silent on the Persian carpets that lined the hallways. Portraits of Ashford ancestors gazed down at him, with expressions ranging from stern disapproval to vapid complacency. How many of them had been complicit in the family's schemes? Alexander's jaw tightened as he thought of his own father, dead before his time, his reputation destroyed by lies. A sound stopped him. Music, soft and haunting, drifting from behind a partially open door. A pianoforte, played with a skill that spoke of years of practice and natural talent. The melody was melancholic, a nocturne of considerable complexity. Curiosity drew him toward the doorway, but nothing prepared him for her. The room beyond was a music salon, decorated in shades of cream and gold, with tall windows that looked out onto a rain-soaked garden. But Alexander saw none of these details, for his entire attention had been captured by the figure seated at the pianoforte, a young woman in a dress of pale blue muslin, her dark hair arranged in an elegant style that left her neck exposed, her fingers moving across the keys with fluid grace. She played with her eyes half closed, lost in the music, unaware of his presence. The young woman he had expected to hate, the silent, graceful maiden, apparently untouched by the poison of her own family, was everything that broke his determination. She had no part in the sins of the past, but she carried their weight. Alexander found himself unable to move, unable to announce himself, unable to do anything but watch and listen. This had to be one of Lord Ashford's daughters, the youngest, he thought. He had researched the family thoroughly, knew their names and ages, but knowing facts on paper and confronting the reality of a living, breathing person were entirely different matters. She was lovely. Not the manufactured beauty of London ballrooms, but something more genuine, a quality of grace and refinement that seemed intrinsic rather than learned. Her profile showed a face of classical proportions, and there was something almost fragile about her, a vulnerability that awakened instincts Alexander had thought long since buried beneath his desire for revenge. The music reached its conclusion, the final notes lingering in the air. The young woman remained still, her hands resting on the keys, her shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. "That was exquisitely played," Alexander heard himself say, the words emerging before conscious thought could prevent them. She turned sharply, startled by his voice, and for the first time their gazes met fully. Her eyes were remarkable, a deep hazel that seemed to shift between green and gold in the candlelight. And it was just one look for the Duke to realize that this was the woman he would never be able to forget. "Forgive me," she said, rising from the pianoforte bench with natural grace. "I was not aware we had a visitor. The servants should have informed me." Her voice matched the rest of her, refined, controlled, but with an underlying warmth that suggested genuine feeling. Alexander found himself searching her face for signs of the Ashford character, the manipulation and deceit. He found nothing. "The fault is mine," Alexander replied, remembering his manners even as his mind raced. "I should not have wandered from the entrance hall. I am Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Hawthorne. Your father is expecting me." Recognition flickered in her eyes at the mention of his title. She executed a perfect curtsy. "Charlotte Ashford," she said simply. "I am Lord Ashford's youngest daughter. I fear my father is away from the house at present, attending to business matters. If your visit is urgent, I could send a message to his club." Charlotte Ashford, the daughter he had noted in his research, but largely dismissed as irrelevant to his plans. He had assumed she would be inconsequential. He had never imagined she would be this. "I can wait," Alexander found himself saying, though waiting was the last thing he had planned. He should leave, return when Lord Ashford was present, focus on his mission without distraction. Instead, he remained rooted to the spot. Charlotte seemed uncertain how to proceed. Propriety dictated that she should not entertain a gentleman caller alone, yet neither could she simply dismiss a duke from her father's home. "Perhaps you would care to wait in the drawing-room," she suggested. "I can have tea brought." "The music room will suffice," Alexander heard himself say. "That is, if you would continue playing. It would make the wait considerably more pleasant." A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by something that might have been pleasure. She returned to the pianoforte bench. "I would be honored," Charlotte said softly. "Do you have a preference for what I should play?" "Surprise me," Alexander replied, settling into a chair positioned where he could watch both her and the doorway. Charlotte's fingers returned to the keys, and this time she chose something entirely different, lighter, more playful. A Mozart sonata, executed with the kind of joy that suggested genuine love for the music. Alexander found himself leaning forward, drawn in despite his better judgment. She played for perhaps 20 minutes, moving through pieces that ranged from Bach to contemporary composers, each selection revealing more about her character. This was no simpering debutante, trained only in accomplishments meant to attract a husband. This was a woman of genuine talent and passion, who poured feeling into every note. Alexander felt something shift within him, a crack in the armor of certainty he had worn for so many years. When she finally paused, turning to look at him with a question in her eyes, Alexander found himself at a loss for words. "You play remarkably well," he said finally. "Have you studied long?" "Since childhood," Charlotte replied, and there was something in her voice that suggested music had been more than mere education. It had been refuge. "My mother encouraged it. She said that music was the language of the soul, the one thing that could never be taken from us no matter what else life brought." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Alexander said carefully. "She was," Charlotte replied, and there was unmistakable grief in those two words. "She passed 3 years ago." The rawness of her loss was evident despite her composure, and Alexander felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. He knew what it was to lose a parent. His own mother had survived his father's disgrace, but had never truly recovered, fading away slowly until death came as a mercy. Yet here sat Charlotte, who had also lost her mother, who carried her own grief with quiet dignity. Before Alexander could respond, the door to the music room opened fully, and the butler appeared with visible relief at having located both his unexpected guest and Miss Ashford. "Miss Charlotte, your father has returned and requests your presence in his study immediately. Your Grace, Lord Ashford will see you now." The spell broke. Reality reasserted itself with all its harsh demands and long-nurtured grievances. Alexander rose from his chair, watching as Charlotte did the same, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes betraying concern. "Thank you for the music, Miss Ashford," Alexander said formally, bowing. "It was a gift I had not expected." "You are welcome, Your Grace," Charlotte replied with a perfect curtsy, but as she straightened, their eyes met once more, and Alexander saw something that disturbed him. He saw curiosity, interest, and the faintest suggestion of connection, as if she too had felt something shift during their time together. Each approach from him meant danger. Each word they exchanged ignited something he couldn't allow. He had a mission. He had an enemy. He had a name to bring down. Then she was gone, following the butler toward her father's study, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts and the portfolio of damning evidence that suddenly felt heavier than before. He had come to London to destroy the Ashford family, to see them ruined as they had ruined his father. He had steel in his spine and righteousness in his cause. He had prepared for opposition, for lies and counter-accusations, for legal battles and social warfare. He had not prepared for Charlotte Ashford, for music played with genuine feeling, for eyes that held pain and grace in equal measure. He had not prepared to feel anything but hatred for anyone bearing that cursed name. The butler returned and gestured for Alexander to follow. The walk to Lord Ashford's study seemed both too long and too short. He forced himself to remember his purpose, to recall all the evidence he had gathered, all the pain his family had suffered. Charlotte Ashford was not his enemy, but neither could she be anything else. She was leverage, perhaps, or collateral damage. Lord Ashford's study was exactly what Alexander had expected. Dark wood panelling, heavy furniture, walls lined with books that had likely never been read, and a massive desk that served as a fortress from which the Marquis could survey his domain. The man himself stood behind that desk, tall and still handsome despite advancing years, his expression one of calculated civility that did not reach his eyes. "Duke Hawthorne," Lord Ashford said, his voice smooth as oil on water. "This is an unexpected visit. I was not aware we had business to discuss." "Were you not?" Alexander replied, allowing ice to enter his voice as he placed his portfolio on the desk between them. "Then perhaps your memory is failing, my lord, or perhaps you have committed so many acts requiring accounting that you cannot keep track of them all." Lord Ashford's composure cracked slightly, a tightening around his eyes that betrayed concern. "I'm afraid I don't understand your meaning," the Marquis said, though his hand moved unconsciously toward the papers Alexander had set down. "Don't you?" Alexander leaned forward, his voice dropping to deadly quiet. "Then allow me to illuminate you. Cornwall, the mining operations, the falsified reports, the investors you defrauded, including my father, who trusted you as a friend and business partner, the systematic theft and cover-up that destroyed his reputation and contributed to his death. Do these matters ring any bells, Lord Ashford?" The colour drained from the Marquis's face, leaving him looking suddenly older, more fragile. But Alexander felt no satisfaction in this, only the cold determination to see justice done. "That was business," Lord Ashford said finally, attempting to regain his composure. "Investments carry risk. Your father understood that." "My father understood that you doctored the assessments," Alexander countered, "that you knew the mines were depleted, but hid that information to continue extracting investment, that you falsified production reports and bribed officials to maintain the fiction, and when it all collapsed, you ensured that blame fell on the junior partners while you emerged unscathed. But I have proof now, my lord. Letters in your own hand, testimony from men you thought safely silenced, evidence that will destroy you." Lord Ashford sank into his chair, and for a moment he looked like nothing more than an old man facing the consequences of long-buried sins. "What do you want?" the Marquis asked finally, the question of a man who knew he was defeated. "I want the truth published," Alexander said. "I want restitution for the families you defrauded. I want your ill-gotten gains redistributed to those who actually earned them. And I want your name attached to every article and account that tells the story of your corruption." "That would ruin us," Lord Ashford whispered. "As you ruined my father," Alexander replied without sympathy. "As you ruined countless others who trusted you. You deserve no less." Lord Ashford's expression hardened. "You would destroy an entire family? My sons, my daughter. They are innocent of any wrongdoing. Would you see them suffer for my mistakes?" The mention of his daughter brought Charlotte's face unbidden to Alexander's mind. Her gentle expression as she played, the grace of her movements, the intelligence in her eyes. He pushed the image away. "They have benefited from your crimes," Alexander said. "Their wealth, their position, all built on lies and theft." "Please," Lord Ashford said, and there was genuine fear in his voice now. "There must be some way to settle this privately. Name your price." "You cannot buy your way out of this," Alexander said coldly. "I am not one of your business partners, easily silenced with money. I am the son of a man you destroyed, and I will see justice done." The conversation continued for another hour, Lord Ashford alternating between attempts at negotiation, threats of legal action, and desperate pleas. Alexander remained unmoved, presenting document after document. By the time Alexander departed the study, Lord Ashford sat broken behind his desk. Alexander collected his portfolio and made his way toward the entrance hall, his mind already turning to the next steps. He would meet with his solicitors, arrange for the evidence to be submitted to the appropriate authorities. The machinery of justice would finally begin to turn. But as he passed the music room, he paused. The door stood ajar, and through it he could hear the sound of crying, soft, restrained, but unmistakable. Charlotte. She must have been told something of what transpired, must have understood that disaster loomed over her family. Alexander found his hand reaching for the door handle before conscious thought could intervene. She sat at the pianoforte bench, her back to the door, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. She had not lit additional candles, and the growing darkness of evening cast the room in shadows that matched the despair evident in her posture. Alexander should have left her to her grief. Instead, he entered the room, closing the door softly behind him. "Miss Ashford," he said gently. She turned quickly, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. In the dim light, her eyes glittered with moisture. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said, her voice thick with tears, but maintaining composure. "I did not hear you approach. I should not be receiving guests in such a state." "There is nothing to forgive," Alexander replied, moving closer. "I am the one who should apologize. My business with your father has clearly caused distress." Charlotte looked at him directly, her gaze searching his face. "My father told me you have evidence of his wrongdoing, that you intend to expose him publicly, to see him ruined." "Yes," Alexander said simply. He would not lie to her. "And there is nothing I could say that would change your mind? No appeal I could make on behalf of our family?" The question held no manipulation, no attempt at seduction. It was simply an honest inquiry from a woman who understood she faced disaster. "Your father destroyed mine," Alexander said quietly. "He lied, he cheated, he stole, and when the consequences began to emerge, he ensured that my father bore the blame while he remained untouched. My father died in disgrace, his name ruined. I will not let that injustice stand." Charlotte closed her eyes and a fresh tear traced down her cheek. "I understand," she whispered. "If I were in your position, I would likely feel the same. But, Your Grace, I must ask, do you truly believe that visiting more pain upon innocent parties serves justice, or does it merely perpetuate the cycle of suffering?" The question struck Alexander with unexpected force. He had never considered that justice and vengeance might not be the same thing, but also had a heart that had never been tested this way. "I do not know," Alexander admitted. I know only that I cannot let the truth remain buried." "Then publish the truth," Charlotte said, her voice growing stronger. "Expose the crimes, name the guilty parties, but allow the courts and society to determine the consequences. Do not make yourself judge, jury, and executioner." She rose and took a step toward him, close enough now that Alexander could see the color of her eyes even in the dimness. "You speak with wisdom beyond your years, Miss Ashford," Alexander said, "but I fear you do not fully understand the depth of what was done to my family." "Perhaps not," Charlotte acknowledged, "but I understand grief, Your Grace. I understand what it is to lose someone you love, and to feel that the world has become colder in their absence. And I know that adding more darkness to the world does not honor their memory." They stood in silence, the weight of their opposing positions hanging between them. "I must go," Alexander said finally, "but I will consider what you have said, Miss Ashford. I make no promises, but I will consider." Charlotte nodded, and despite her tears, she managed a small smile. "That is all I can ask, Your Grace. Thank you for that much." Alexander bowed and turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Your Grace, the music you heard earlier, the nocturne I was playing when you arrived, it was written by a composer who lost everything he loved, but continued to create beauty despite his pain. I have always found that remarkable, that even in darkness the human spirit seeks light." Alexander did not trust himself to respond, merely nodded and made his escape. In his carriage, his mind churned with thoughts and emotions he had not anticipated. Everything had seemed so clear just hours ago. Now nothing felt certain, except that Charlotte Ashford had managed to shake foundations he had thought unshakable. He thought of her playing the pianoforte, lost in music. He thought of her tears and her quiet dignity, her wisdom and her compassion. And he knew with a sinking certainty that his carefully planned campaign of revenge had just become infinitely more complicated. He had discovered that he cared what Charlotte Ashford thought of him, and that caring might very well prove to be his undoing. The days following Alexander's confrontation with Lord Ashford passed in a peculiar suspension, as if London itself held its breath awaiting the scandal that would surely erupt. Alexander met with his solicitors, Mr. Pemberton and his associates, presenting the damning evidence with methodical precision. The legal men examined each document, their expressions growing increasingly grave. "This is extraordinary, Your Grace," Mr. Pemberton said, setting down the last ledger. "More than sufficient to see Lord Ashford stripped of his holdings, possibly imprisoned. The courts will have no choice but to act decisively." Alexander waited for the satisfaction these words should have brought. Instead, he found himself thinking of Charlotte's question, whether adding more suffering to the world truly served justice or merely perpetuated cycles of pain. "How long before proceedings begin?" Alexander asked. "We could file within the week," Mr. Pemberton replied. "Once we do, the scandal will be immediate. Lord Ashford's creditors will move to protect their interests. The family will face social ruin, invitations withdrawn, daughters unmarriageable, sons unable to secure positions. The Ashford name will become synonymous with disgrace. Unmarriageable." Alexander's chest tightened at the word. Charlotte, with her grace and talent and gentle wisdom, condemned to life as a social pariah through no fault of her own. "Is there no way to pursue accountability while protecting innocent family members?" Alexander heard himself ask. Mr. Pemberton looked genuinely surprised. "I'm afraid not, Your Grace. The law recognizes the family as a single unit. When the head falls, all connected to him share the consequences. That is simply how society functions." Alexander dismissed his solicitors with instructions to make no filings without his explicit approval. He told himself he was being strategic, ensuring all angles were considered. But he knew the truth was more complicated and infinitely more troubling. He could not stop thinking about Charlotte Ashford. In the days that followed, Alexander found himself manufacturing reasons to be where she might be. A morning ride through Hyde Park, attendance at a musicale hosted by Lady Pemberton, a visit to Hatchard's bookshop during hours when young ladies typically browsed. Each time he told himself it was mere coincidence. Each time, his heart knew better. The fourth encounter occurred at an art exhibition at Somerset House. Alexander arrived early, hoping to view the paintings before crowds descended. Instead, he found Charlotte already present, standing before a large canvas depicting a storm-tossed sea, her expression thoughtful and melancholic. "You have excellent taste, Miss Ashford," Alexander said quietly. "That is one of Turner's finest works." Charlotte turned, and he saw surprise followed by unmistakable pleasure flash across her features before she composed herself. "Your Grace," she said, her curtsy somehow both proper and slightly mocking. "What a surprise to find you here." "Is it?" Alexander asked with a hint of amusement. "I confess, I am beginning to suspect that London is far smaller than I had previously believed." A smile tugged at Charlotte's mouth. "Or perhaps certain people are drawn to the same places by similar inclinations. You appreciate art, then?" "I do, though my preferences run to the romantics, Turner, Constable, those who capture emotion as well as image." "As opposed to the classical school?" Charlotte asked with genuine interest. "The perfectly composed scenes where everything is balanced and idealized." "Precisely. Life is rarely balanced or ideal. Art that acknowledges that truth seems more honest to me." Charlotte studied the painting with renewed attention. The depicted sea churned with violence, waves threatening to overwhelm a small vessel struggling against the storm. "I used to prefer the classical style," Charlotte said softly, "everything orderly and controlled. But life taught me differently. My mother's illness, watching her fade. Now I find I prefer art like this. Work that acknowledges darkness, while still creating something beautiful from it." The vulnerability in her words moved Alexander profoundly. This was honest revelation, and the gift of that trust felt precious. "Your mother would be proud of you," Alexander said quietly. "You honor her memory well." They stood in silence, two people who should have been enemies finding unexpected common ground. "Your Grace," Charlotte said after a moment, her voice carefully controlled, "I must ask, have you made a decision about my father, about what you intend to do?" "I have not yet filed any formal complaints," Alexander said. "I am still considering the matter." "Because of what I said?" "Perhaps, or perhaps because the situation is more complex than I initially understood." Charlotte turned to face him fully, searching his expression. "You confuse me, Your Grace," she said with startling directness. "You come seeking vengeance, armed with evidence that could destroy us all, yet you hesitate. You seek out my company. Do not deny it, I have noticed. I do not understand what you want." "Neither do I," Alexander confessed. "I came to London knowing exactly what I intended to accomplish. But then—" He stopped, uncertain how to continue. "But then you met me," Charlotte finished softly, "and I complicated your simple narrative. You are remarkably perceptive, Miss Ashford. I have had to be. Women in our position learn to read subtleties. We rarely have the luxury of straightforward communication." Alexander smiled despite the gravity of their conversation. "Then perhaps we should attempt such luxury now. Cards on the table. You want to understand my intentions. I want to understand how you can be so different from your family. Shall we negotiate? Here, in the middle of an art exhibition? Why not? We are in public, which ensures propriety, and I find I am tired of pretense and half-truths." Charlotte considered, then nodded decisively. "Very well, Your Grace. What do you want from me?" What Alexander wanted went far beyond simple answers. What he wanted was her company, her regard, her presence in his life. But such admissions were impossible. "I want to understand how you can be so honorable when surrounded by corruption," he said instead. Charlotte's expression grew sad. "You assume I am untouched. That is not accurate. I simply chose a different response to what I witnessed." "Explain." She took a deep breath. "I was 12 when I first understood that my father's business dealings were not entirely honest. I overheard a conversation discussing how to hide financial irregularities. I went to my mother, asked her what I should do. And she said something I have never forgotten. She said that we cannot always control the actions of others, even those we love. But we can control our own choices, our own character. She said I must decide what kind of person I wanted to be, independent of what my family chose." Charlotte's voice caught with emotion. "My mother knew exactly what my father was, yet she stayed. Not from weakness, but because she believed she could be a stabilizing force, could raise her children to be better." She failed with my brothers, but with me I hope she succeeded." Alexander felt something fundamental shift within him. Charlotte's innocence was not ignorance, but conscious choice. That took strength of character far beyond mere naivety. "I see," he said quietly. "And now, what will you do when your father's crimes become public?" "What can I do?" Charlotte replied with bitter acceptance. "I will bear the consequences. I will become unmarriageable, socially ruined, forced to live on charity. Society will judge me guilty by association." The bleakness of her prospects struck Alexander viscerally. This was what his quest for justice would accomplish, the destruction of an innocent woman. "That is unjust," he said. "Yes," Charlotte agreed. "But justice and fairness are not the same thing, are they?" They stood in weighted silence. "What if there were another way?" Alexander heard himself say. "A way to hold your father accountable while protecting you?" Charlotte looked at him with mingled hope and suspicion. "What way?" Alexander's mind raced, considering possibilities he had not previously entertained. "Marry me," he said. Charlotte stared as if he had begun speaking unknown tongues. "I beg your pardon?" "Marry me," Alexander repeated, his mind now catching up with his impulsive offer and finding unexpected logic. "As my wife, you would be protected. The Duchess of Hawthorne stands beyond society's censure regarding her family of origin. Your father would still face consequences, but you would be shielded." "That is absurd," Charlotte said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You cannot marry someone to protect them from scandal. Marriage should be based on mutual regard, on affection, on compatibility." "And are we not compatible?" Alexander challenged. "Have we not discovered unexpected common ground? I admit this is precipitous, that we have known each other briefly, but I have seen enough to know you are a woman of honor and intelligence, qualities I value above conventional beauty or social connections." Charlotte shook her head, but he could see her considering his proposal, weighing it against bleak alternatives. "Why would you do this? You hate my family. You came to destroy us. Now you offer to marry me. What game are you playing?" "No game. I came seeking revenge, that is true, but I have discovered that revenge is more complicated than I assumed. Your father deserves punishment. Of that I am certain, but you do not. And if marrying you allows me to satisfy justice while showing mercy, then perhaps it serves everyone's interests." "Everyone except yourself," Charlotte pointed out. "You would bind yourself to the daughter of your enemy. Society would question your judgment." "I would be connected to you," Alexander corrected gently, "and I find I do not mind that prospect at all." Charlotte's eyes searched his face, looking for deception. Alexander met her gaze steadily, letting her see whatever she needed. "I need time to consider this," Charlotte said finally. "It is too important to decide hastily." "Of course. Take whatever time you need. I will not file complaints against your father until we have spoken again." "You have my word." They parted soon after, the conversation having exhausted them both. Alexander returned to his hotel, feeling as if he had fought a battle. He had come seeking a glimpse of Charlotte. Instead, he had proposed marriage, yet he could not regret his impulsive offer. The truth was unavoidable. Charlotte had captured something essential in him. The thought of her facing ruin while he stood by was intolerable. Days passed in strange suspension. Alexander told his solicitors he was considering additional evidence. In reality, he was waiting for Charlotte's answer, his entire campaign suspended pending her decision. He did not see her during this time, though not for lack of trying. The Ashfords had withdrawn from society. He sent a note requesting permission to call but received no response. The silence gnawed at him. Finally, after a week that felt like months, a message arrived. Not from Charlotte, but from Lord Ashford, requesting a meeting at his club. Alexander's first instinct was refusal, but curiosity and the possibility that the message related to his proposal drove him to accept. Lord Ashford looked diminished since their last meeting, as if guilt had physically shrunk him. They met in a private room at White's, away from curious observers. "So, Your Grace," Lord Ashford began heavily, "I find myself in an impossible position. My daughter has informed me of your proposal. I confess I do not understand it. You come seeking to destroy me, yet offer to marry my youngest child." What am I to make of this? Make of it what you will, Alexander replied evenly. My proposal to Miss Ashford stands independent of my grievances against you. Does it? Or is this another form of revenge, binding my daughter to you so you can make her suffer privately? The accusation stung, perhaps because Alexander had briefly wondered the same, but he had examined his feelings as honestly as he could and found no hint of cruelty. I have no intention of causing Miss Ashford any suffering, Alexander said firmly. My offer is made in good faith, with her protection as the primary consideration. Lord Ashford studied him, then sighed deeply. Charlotte believes you are sincere. She says she sees no deception in you, that despite your anger toward me, you have shown her nothing but courtesy and respect. She is inclined to accept your proposal. Alexander's heart leaped, though he maintained careful control. And you? What is your position? What choice do I have? Lord Ashford replied bitterly. If Charlotte accepts, she at least has some future. If she refuses, she faces ostracism and poverty. As her father, how can I counsel her to reject the only protection offered? Then you give your blessing? I give my resignation to reality. This is not how I imagined my daughter's marriage. Instead, she must bind herself to a man who despises her family, who holds power over all of us. I do not despise Charlotte, Alexander said quietly. In fact, I find myself quite the opposite. She is remarkable, intelligent, talented, compassionate. If circumstances were different, I would still consider myself fortunate to win her regard. Lord Ashford's expression softened slightly. You truly mean that? I do. Then I suppose I must thank you, though the words taste bitter. You are offering my daughter salvation while I can offer her nothing but shame. Very well, Your Grace. You have my permission to marry Charlotte for whatever that is worth. The interview concluded, leaving Alexander both elated and troubled. Charlotte was inclined to accept, but he had not yet heard from her directly. 2 days later, a note arrived in Charlotte's hand, requesting his presence at 3 o'clock. Alexander arrived precisely on time, his heart beating with unusual nervousness. He was shown to the music salon where they had first met. Charlotte stood by the windows in a simple morning gown of pale green muslin, her hair arranged without elaborate styling. Yet Alexander found her more beautiful than any ornately dressed lady. Your Grace, she said, her voice steady, but her hands betraying nervousness. Thank you for coming. Miss Ashford, Alexander replied, moving closer. Your note suggested urgency. Yes, Charlotte said, meeting his eyes directly. I have made my decision regarding your proposal. Alexander's breath caught. And? First, I need to understand what you truly expect from such a marriage, Charlotte said with careful courage. Are you offering a marriage in name only? A business arrangement while we live separate lives, or something more? A genuine union with all that entails? The question touched upon every aspect of married life. Alexander had not fully considered the details, driven more by desire to protect Charlotte than any clear vision. But now, confronted with her inquiry, he examined his own heart. I will not lie to you, Miss Ashford, Alexander said slowly. When I first proposed, my primary motivation was to shield you from consequences of your father's crimes. But I have spent these days thinking about what marriage to you might mean, and I find myself hoping for more than mere convenience. More, Charlotte echoed, something flickering in her eyes. Hope, perhaps, or cautious curiosity. I find myself drawn to you in ways I cannot fully explain, Alexander admitted. Your grace, your intelligence, your compassion, these qualities have captured my attention and something deeper. I came to London seeking revenge, but I have discovered something far more valuable. I have discovered you. Colour rose in Charlotte's cheeks. You barely know me, Your Grace. We have spoken perhaps a handful of times. How can you claim such feelings? Sometimes understanding comes not from lengthy exposure, but from meaningful connection, Alexander replied. In our few conversations, I have learned more about your character than about women I have known for years. You challenged my certainties, made me question assumptions I thought unshakable. You showed me that justice and vengeance are not the same thing. Charlotte remained silent, her gaze fixed on the garden beyond the windows. "I am not the accomplished lady you might expect a duke to marry," she said quietly. "I have no fortune, no powerful connections. My family name is about to become synonymous with scandal. I can offer you only myself, my loyalty, my honesty, whatever small talents I possess. Is that truly enough?" Alexander closed the distance between them, propriety forgotten in his urgency to make her understand. He stopped just short of touching her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. "You are more than enough," he said with fierce conviction. "You are everything I did not know I needed. Your fortune means nothing. I have wealth sufficient for both of us. Your family connections are irrelevant. What matters is you, Charlotte. Your kindness, your courage, your ability to see goodness even in darkness. Those are the qualities I value." Tears gathered in Charlotte's eyes, though she did not let them fall. "You make it sound almost like a love match," she whispered. "Perhaps it could be," Alexander replied softly. "In time, with patience and understanding. I cannot promise you passionate declarations, Charlotte. My heart has been guarded so long I scarcely know how to unlock it. But I can promise you respect, partnership, and my best efforts to build something genuine between us. Is that enough to begin with?" Charlotte raised her eyes to his, and Alexander saw the moment of decision crystallize. "Yes," she said. "Yes, that is enough. I accept your proposal, Alexander. Not merely as escape from scandal, but as the beginning of something that might, with care and time, become what we both need." The use of his given name sent warmth flooding through Alexander's chest, a small intimacy, but significant. "Then we are engaged," Alexander said, unable to suppress a smile. "I should arrange for a special license. There is no need for delay unless you wish it." "No delay," Charlotte agreed. "Every day we wait is another day for scandal to break. Better to move swiftly." They spent the next hour discussing practical arrangements with growing ease. Alexander would secure a special license, allowing them to marry without bans. The ceremony would be small, held at the chapel on Alexander's estate, rather than in London where gossip could interfere. Charlotte would need a trousseau, which Alexander insisted on providing despite her protests. As they talked, Alexander found himself increasingly charmed by Charlotte's practical nature and quick intelligence. She asked thoughtful questions about his estates, his expectations, his plans regarding her father's legal troubles. She neither shied away from difficult topics nor pretended ignorance. "What will happen to my father?" Charlotte asked finally. Alexander considered carefully. "He will face legal consequences. I have evidence that cannot be dismissed. But I will ensure the punishment fits the crime. Restitution to those he defrauded, financial penalties, perhaps restricted freedoms. I will not push for imprisonment or complete ruin. Does that satisfy you?" "It is more mercy than he deserves," Charlotte said quietly, "but also more than I dared hope for, thank you." "Thank me by playing something," Alexander suggested, gesturing toward the pianoforte. "I have missed hearing you perform." A smile transformed Charlotte's face with genuine pleasure. She moved to the instrument and settled onto the bench. Her fingers found the keys, and music filled the room, a melody both melancholic and hopeful, perfectly capturing the strange mixture of their emotions. Alexander watched her play, struck by the realization that his life had fundamentally changed. Weeks earlier, he had been a man consumed by vengeance. Now he was engaged, finding peace in her presence rather than satisfaction in planned retribution. Had he betrayed his father's memory by choosing this path, or honored it by choosing mercy over endless anger? Alexander did not know, but as he watched Charlotte play, he found he could live with the uncertainty. When the music concluded, Charlotte turned to find him watching her. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I am fortunate," Alexander replied honestly. "That circumstances I thought purely tragic have led me to you. That perhaps fate is wiser than we credit it for being. Or perhaps we are simply making the best of a difficult situation," Charlotte suggested, though her smile suggested she preferred his interpretation. "Can it not be both?" Charlotte's smile widened. "Yes, I suppose it can." Their engagement was announced 3 days later, causing exactly the sensation Alexander had anticipated. Society matrons declared themselves shocked that the Duke of Hawthorne would ally himself with the Ashford family. Alexander's acquaintances questioned his judgment. Alexander ignored them all with aristocratic hauteur, making clear that his decisions were not subject to popular approval. Charlotte bore the whispers with quiet dignity that only increased Alexander's respect for her. And thus, between revelations, injustices, and buried secrets, the Duke did the unthinkable. He fought against his own oath to protect her. And when London discovered his involvement with the daughter of the family he swore to destroy, it was too late. The days before their wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Alexander found himself calling at the Ashford residence with increasing frequency, ostensibly to discuss arrangements, but truly because he discovered he enjoyed Charlotte's company. They took walks in the garden, conversed over tea, and in the evenings she played for him while he listened, feeling the hard edges of his anger gradually softening. One evening, as twilight painted the music room in shades of amber and rose, Charlotte finished a particularly beautiful piece and turned to him, with uncharacteristic vulnerability in her expression. "Are you afraid?" she asked softly. "Of what we are about to do." Terrified, Alexander admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "Not of you, but of failing you, of discovering I am not capable of being the husband you deserve." "And I am afraid of being trapped in a marriage of obligation," Charlotte confessed, "of waking each morning to see regret in your eyes when you remember what you surrendered for this alliance." Alexander rose from his chair and came to sit beside her on the pianoforte bench, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Then let us make a pact," he said. "Let us promise to be honest with each other, even when honesty is difficult. Let us agree to try, genuinely try, to build something real between us, rather than merely tolerating an arrangement." Charlotte searched his face, then slowly extended her hand. "A pact, then." Alexander took her hand, feeling the delicacy of her fingers within his larger, rougher palm. The touch sent unexpected warmth through him, and he saw from the slight widening of Charlotte's eyes that she felt it too, this spark of connection that defied logic and circumstance. A pact, he agreed. He would do anything to make her his, even sacrifice the last piece of the revenge that had sustained him for years. Because in the end, the greatest scandal of all was not the conflict between two families. It was the unexpected love between a wounded duke and the only woman destined to heal him. The wedding took place on a morning when autumn mist clung to the grounds of Alexander's estate in Derbyshire, lending an ethereal quality to the ancient chapel that had witnessed generations of Blackwood unions. Charlotte stood in her ivory silk gown, simple, elegant, requiring no elaborate ornamentation, and felt the weight of this moment settle upon her shoulders. She was marrying a man she barely knew, binding her fate to his in hopes that the fragile connection between them might grow into something sustainable, perhaps even beautiful. Alexander waited at the altar, his expression grave but his eyes softening when she appeared in the doorway on her father's arm. Lord Ashford walked with the bearing of a man attending an execution as much as a wedding, understanding that he was surrendering his daughter to the mercy of the man he had wronged. Yet when he placed Charlotte's hand in Alexander's, he whispered words only they could hear. "Protect her. She is the best of us." "With my life," Alexander replied, and Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. The ceremony proceeded with traditional solemnity. Charlotte spoke her vows clearly, Alexander's deep voice resonating through the chapel as he pledged himself to her. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, a band of gold set with sapphires that matched the color of evening sky, and looked into her eyes with something that might have been wonder, Charlotte felt hope bloom in her chest. They were married, the Duke and Duchess of Hawthorne. Two souls brought together by scandal and vengeance, choosing to forge something new from the ruins of old grievances. The wedding breakfast was intimate, attended only by Alexander's closest friends and a handful of Charlotte's relations who had not abandoned her. Alexander's friends, initially skeptical of the match, found themselves charmed by Charlotte's grace and intelligence. She conversed easily about music, literature, and current events, revealing an education that belied assumptions about sheltered aristocratic daughters. As evening approached and guests departed, Alexander and Charlotte found themselves alone in the drawing room of his ancestral home. The awkwardness Charlotte had feared did not materialize. Instead, they settled into conversation as naturally as they had during their brief courtship. "Are you content?" Alexander asked as darkness fell and candles were lit throughout the room. Charlotte considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Content seems too mild a word, and happy too strong. I am hopeful, grateful, cautiously optimistic that we have made a good beginning." "Then we are of one mind," Alexander said, reaching for her hand. "For I feel precisely the same." Their first weeks of marriage established patterns that would define their relationship. Alexander handled business affairs in the mornings, while Charlotte managed household matters and spent time with her music. They shared meals and conversation, gradually learning each other's habits and preferences. In the evenings, they often sat together in comfortable silence, Charlotte playing while Alexander read or simply listened. The physical intimacy of marriage developed slowly, with patience and growing trust. Alexander was careful not to rush, mindful of Charlotte's relative innocence and their unusual circumstances. Charlotte, for her part, approached this aspect of married life with the same mixture of curiosity and courage she brought to everything else. What began as awkward courtesy gradually transformed into genuine affection, and eventually something deeper. News from London brought both expected and surprising developments. Lord Ashford's legal troubles proceeded as Alexander had ensured, measured, focused on restitution rather than complete destruction. Alexander presented his evidence to courts and creditors, but he also provided testimony distinguishing between Lord Ashford's personal guilt and his family's innocence. The strategy worked. Lord Ashford faced financial penalties and loss of certain privileges, but avoided imprisonment and total ruin. Charlotte's brothers wrote seeking her assistance, having found themselves without prospects. Rather than ignore their pleas, Charlotte discussed the matter with Alexander, who agreed to provide limited support in exchange for genuine reform. Both young men were offered positions managing estates in Scotland, far from London's temptations and their father's corrupting influence. It was an act of mercy that surprised them and gradually transformed them. Through all of this, Alexander found his anger gradually dissolving, replaced by something he slowly recognized as peace. The quest for revenge that had consumed him for years no longer seemed important. His father was dead and beyond caring about earthly justice. But Alexander was alive, married to a remarkable woman, building a future rather than remaining trapped in past grievances. One evening, 6 weeks after their wedding, Alexander found Charlotte at the pianoforte, but she was not playing. She sat with her hands in her lap, staring at the keys with an expression of profound melancholy. "What troubles you?" Alexander asked gently, taking a seat beside her on the bench. Charlotte was quiet before answering. "I was thinking about my mother, wishing she could have met you, could have known that I found someone who values me for myself rather than my family connections or fortune. She would have liked you, I think." "I wish I could have known her," Alexander replied honestly. "Any woman who raised a daughter like you must have been exceptional." "She was," Charlotte whispered, tears finally spilling over. "She was everything good that our family possessed, and we lost her too soon." Alexander drew Charlotte into his arms, offering comfort without words. She wept against his shoulder, releasing grief she had carried too long without proper outlet. He held her until the storm passed, then dried her tears with his own handkerchief, touched by her trust in showing him such vulnerability. "Play something for her," Alexander suggested softly. "Something she loved." Charlotte nodded and turned to the keys. The melody that emerged was hauntingly beautiful. A lullaby, Alexander realized, probably something Charlotte's mother had sung to her in childhood. The simplicity made the emotion more powerful, and Alexander found his own eyes stinging with tears he had not shed for his own lost parents. When the music faded, they sat together in silence, bound by shared grief and growing love. This was what marriage should be, Alexander realized, not merely legal contract or social alliance, but genuine partnership between two people who chose to share both joy and sorrow. "Thank you," Charlotte said finally, turning to look at him with red-rimmed eyes that somehow seemed more beautiful for their honesty. "Thank you for understanding, for not requiring me to be perpetually cheerful or grateful, for allowing me to simply be. "You need never thank me for that," Alexander replied. "I married you, Charlotte, all of you, including your grief and fears and imperfections. That is what love means, I think. Accepting another person fully, without condition or reservation." Charlotte's breath caught. "Love," she repeated softly. Alexander realized what he had said and found he could not retract it. "Yes," he said simply. "Love. I did not plan for it, did not expect it, but somewhere between rage and mercy, between justice and forgiveness, I fell in love with you, and I find I am not sorry for it." Tears welled again in Charlotte's eyes, but these were different, tears of wonder rather than sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have from almost the beginning, though I was afraid to acknowledge it. You were supposed to be my enemy. Instead, you became my salvation and eventually my heart." They kissed then, a true kiss of love rather than duty or awkward exploration. And in that moment, Alexander understood that justice had been served after all. Not through punishment and retribution, but through transformation and grace. His father's death had been avenged not by destroying the Ashfords, but by saving one of them, by choosing to build rather than destroy. The winter that followed brought both challenges and unexpected joys. London society gradually accepted the Duke and Duchess of Hawthorne as an established couple, though whispers about the match's unusual origins persisted. Alexander and Charlotte paid such gossip little mind, secure in the foundation they were building together. Lord Ashford's legal proceedings concluded with results that satisfied justice without destroying lives. The former Marquess was stripped of his corrupt business interests and required to make substantial restitution to those he had defrauded, including Alexander's family estate. But imprisonment was avoided, and Lord Ashford retained a modest income sufficient for comfortable if not luxurious living. He retreated to a small property in the countryside, a diminished but not destroyed man. Charlotte visited her father once after the settlement, taking Alexander with her at his insistence. The meeting was awkward but necessary, allowing for words that needed to be spoken even if forgiveness remained incomplete. "I am sorry," Lord Ashford said to Alexander, the words clearly difficult for a man unaccustomed to admitting fault. "For what I did to your father, for the pain I caused your family. I have no excuse beyond greed and cowardice. I hope that the restitution provides some measure of compensation, though I know it cannot restore what was lost." Alexander studied the older man, seeing not the villain he had imagined for so many years, but simply a flawed human being who had made terrible choices and was now living with consequences. The anger that had sustained him for so long was gone, replaced by something closer to pity. "The restitution helps," Alexander acknowledged, "but what matters more is that the truth is now known. My father's name has been cleared, his reputation restored. That was what I truly sought, not your destruction but his vindication." "You are more merciful than I deserve," Lord Ashford said quietly, "particularly given that you have also protected my daughter from scandal and ruin. I will be grateful for that mercy until my last breath." Charlotte said little during the visit, but Alexander felt her hand tighten in his when her father spoke of protection and gratitude. Later, as they travelled back to their estate, she broke her silence. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Showing mercy instead of pursuing complete vengeance?" "No," Alexander replied without hesitation. "Vengeance would have destroyed him, but it would not have healed me. This, what we have built together, has done more to restore my peace than any amount of retribution could have accomplished." As spring arrived, Charlotte discovered she was with child. The news brought joy mixed with appropriate apprehension, but Alexander's steadfast support helped ease her fears. He attended to her with devoted care, ensuring she had everything needed for comfort and health. During Charlotte's confinement, Alexander sorted through his father's remaining papers, documents he had avoided for years because they represented too much pain. Among them he found letters his father had written but never sent, notes composed during his final illness, addressed to Alexander for reading after death. One letter in particular struck Alexander with profound force. "My dear son, if you are reading this, then I have departed this world, and you are left to carry forward our family name. I know the scandal surrounding my business affairs has wounded you deeply, and I fear you will spend years seeking to clear my reputation and punish those responsible. But I must tell you something important. Do not let anger consume you. Do not sacrifice your happiness and your future on the altar of past grievances. The greatest revenge you could take on those who harmed us would be to live well, to find joy, to build a life worth living. I made mistakes, son. I trusted the wrong people and paid dearly for that trust. But my greatest mistake would be if my death caused you to become hard and bitter, forever trapped in the past. Promise me you will not let that happen. Promise me you will choose life over anger, love over vengeance. Your loving father, Alexander, read the letter multiple times, tears streaming freely down his face. His father had understood the temptation toward vengeance and had tried to warn him against it. How much pain could have been avoided if Alexander had found this letter years earlier? But perhaps the timing was perfect. Perhaps he needed to walk the path of anger to understand why his father counseled against it. He showed the letter to Charlotte that evening, and she wept with him, touched by the wisdom and love of a man she had never met, but who had shaped both their lives through his suffering and his final counsel. "He would have loved you," Alexander said, holding Charlotte close, "and he would have been proud that I chose mercy over vengeance, partnership over isolation." "I wish I could have known him," Charlotte replied. "But I know him through you, through your capacity for love despite years of anger, through your willingness to forgive when justice would have been served by punishment. You are his legacy, Alexander. The best parts of him live on in you." Their son was born in late summer, a healthy boy they named Thomas after Alexander's father. The baby's arrival brought unexpected joy and a sense of renewal, as if past griefs were being replaced by future hope. Lord Ashford was invited to visit and meet his grandson, a gesture of reconciliation that moved the old man to tears. Charlotte bloomed as a mother, her natural warmth and patience perfectly suited to the demands of infant care. Alexander discovered depths of tenderness he had not known he possessed, finding himself captivated by his small son's every expression and movement. Their household became a place of happiness rather than merely duty or obligation. As their first wedding anniversary approached, Alexander reflected on the extraordinary journey they had traveled. 1 year earlier, he had been a man consumed by vengeance, hardened by years of anger and single-minded purpose. Now he was a husband and father, building a life based on love rather than hatred, creation rather than destruction. "Do you ever regret it?" Charlotte asked him one evening, as they sat together in the drawing room, their son sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby. "Giving up your quest for complete vengeance? Choosing to marry me instead of destroying my family utterly?" Alexander looked at his wife, at the woman who had challenged his certainties and softened his hardened heart, who had shown him that strength could manifest as compassion and that justice was best served with mercy. "Never," he said firmly. "You and Thomas are worth more than any amount of vengeance. My father's letter confirmed what I had already learned through knowing you, that the best revenge is living well, loving deeply, and refusing to let past pain poison the present." Charlotte smiled, that luminous expression that still had the power to make Alexander's breath catch. "Then we have both found something we were not seeking, but desperately needed." "What is that?" "Redemption," Charlotte said softly. "You from your anger, me from my family's sins. We redeemed each other, Alexander. That is the greatest gift we could have given ourselves." The years that followed brought their share of both challenges and joys. Alexander managed his estates with fairness and wisdom, earning a reputation as a progressive landlord who valued his tenants' well-being. Charlotte established a music school for talented young women of limited means, using her position as Duchess to create opportunities that had not existed before. They had 3 more children, 2 daughters and another son, each adding to the rich tapestry of their family life. The scandal of their marriage's origins faded into history, replaced by respect for what they had built together. Society eventually forgot that Charlotte had been born an Ashford, knowing her only as the beloved Duchess of Hawthorne. Lord Ashford lived to see his grandchildren grow, his final years spent in quiet reflection rather than scheming and corruption. Before his death, He told Charlotte that his greatest achievement was not the fortune he had accumulated or the title he had borne, but the daughter he had raised, who had possessed the strength to choose differently than her family's patterns. Alexander's father's name was fully restored through Alexander's efforts, and the restitution paid by Lord Ashford. A memorial was erected honouring his contributions to Cornwall's mining communities, and scholarships were established in his name for young men seeking careers in honest business practices. It was vindication beyond what vengeance could have provided. On their 10th anniversary, Alexander and Charlotte returned to the music room where they had first truly spoken, where music had bridged the gap between enemy families and allowed connection to form. Charlotte sat at the same pianoforte and played the same nocturne she had been performing when Alexander first encountered her all those years ago. "Do you remember?" she asked when the piece concluded. "I remember everything," Alexander replied. "I remember being angry, being certain of my righteousness, planning destruction. And I remember hearing you play and realizing that nothing was as simple as I had believed." "I remember being afraid," Charlotte admitted. "Afraid of you, of scandal, of my father's sins being revealed, but also feeling something else, recognition perhaps, as if I had been waiting without knowing what I was waiting for." "Waiting for what?" "For you," Charlotte said simply. "For someone who would see me rather than my family name, who would value me for myself. You gave me that gift, Alexander. You saw me. And you saved me," Alexander replied, pulling her close. "From becoming the kind of man I would have despised, hard, bitter, consumed by hatred, you showed me another way, a better way." They kissed, a kiss that held 10 years of partnership and love, of challenges overcome and joys shared. And in that moment, Alexander understood that his father had been right all along. The greatest revenge was indeed living well, and Alexander had achieved that beyond any expectation. Because in the end, the greatest scandal of all was not the conflict between two families. It was the unexpected love between a wounded duke and the only woman destined to heal him. Their story became legend, not because it was perfect or without struggle, but because it represented something essential and true, that even in darkness, light can be found, that even from anger, love can grow, that even between enemies, understanding and affection can bloom if both parties possess the courage and wisdom to choose differently than hatred dictates. The Duke had crossed London seeking justice and vengeance. Instead, he found the woman who would change his fate forever. And in loving her, he discovered that the truest justice was not punishment, but redemption. Not destruction, but creation. Not revenge, but forgiveness. And Charlotte, who had faced ruin through no fault of her own, had found in Alexander not merely protection, but genuine partnership and abiding love. She had transformed from victim of her family's sins into architect of her own happiness, proving that we are not defined by circumstances of our birth, but by the choices we make and the courage we show in making them. Their children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, not a sanitized version, but the true tale of anger and mercy, justice and forgiveness, scandal and redemption. And those children carried forward the lessons learned, that vengeance ultimately destroys the avenger, but mercy enriches both giver and receiver, that love is stronger than hatred, that forgiveness is not weakness, but the ultimate strength. The legacy they built together, of estates managed with fairness, of music schools offering opportunities to those who might otherwise have none, of children raised with both privilege and responsibility, stood as testament to what could be accomplished when two people chose love over hatred, mercy over vengeance. And so the Duke of Hawthorne, who had crossed London seeking to destroy the Ashfords, instead married one, and in doing so saved himself from becoming the very thing he had hated. It was a strange sort of justice, but perhaps the best kind. Justice that healed rather than merely punished, that restored rather than simply destroyed. Their love story endured as proof that even the most tangled circumstances can be transformed by courage, wisdom, and the willingness to choose mercy over vengeance. That even in our darkest moments, redemption remains possible. And that love, true love, has the power to heal wounds we thought would never close. Epilogue. 20 years later. The late afternoon sun cast golden light through the tall windows of the music room at Hawthorne Estate, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. Charlotte, Duchess of Hawthorne, sat at the pianoforte, the same instrument that had witnessed the beginning of her extraordinary love story 30 years prior. Her hair, once entirely dark, now bore elegant silver threads that caught the light. Her hands, though bearing the gentle marks of age, moved across the keys with the same grace and passion that had first captivated a duke consumed by vengeance. She played the nocturne, that same haunting melody she had been performing the day Alexander walked into this room, into her life, and changed both their destinies forever. "Grandmother, that was beautiful," a soft voice said from the doorway. Charlotte smiled and turned to see her eldest granddaughter, Elizabeth, standing in the threshold. The girl was 16, with her grandmother's hazel eyes and her grandfather's determined chin. Behind her stood Charlotte's son, Thomas, now a man of 28, and his wife Margaret cradling their newborn son. "Come in, all of you," Charlotte said warmly. "I was just indulging in memories." "The nocturne that grandfather first heard you play?" Thomas asked, settling into a chair that his father had occupied countless evenings over the decades. "The very one," Charlotte confirmed, though I suspect he loved the musician more than the music itself. "Where is grandfather?" Elizabeth asked, moving to stand beside the pianoforte, her fingers trailing reverently over the polished wood. "In his study, sorting through old papers," Charlotte replied, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "He does that sometimes when he needs to remember who he was and who he chose to become." In his oak-panelled study, Alexander, Duke of Hawthorne, held a letter yellowed with age, his father's final words, the ones that had changed everything when he had discovered them all those years ago. He was 70 now, his dark hair gone silver, his face bearing the lines of a life well lived, but his eyes still held the same intensity, though now tempered by peace rather than anger. A knock at the door drew his attention. "Come," he called. His second son, Edmund, entered with Alexander's youngest daughter, Catherine. Both bore urgent expressions that immediately captured their father's attention. "Father, there's something you should know," Edmund began. "I've been researching our family history for the book I'm writing, and I discovered something extraordinary at the Cornwall Historical Society." Alexander set down his father's letter. "What did you find?" Catherine stepped forward, holding a leather-bound journal. Letters between great-grandfather and Lord Ashford, the early ones before the corruption began. "Father, they were genuine friends. There's a letter here where Lord Ashford saved great-grandfather from a bad investment, warned him about a fraudulent scheme. For years, they trusted each other completely. Which makes his eventual betrayal all the more painful," Alexander said quietly. "Yes, but father," Edmund continued earnestly, "the journal also contains entries from the period when everything collapsed. Lord Ashford's entries show a man consumed by gambling debts, desperate, making progressively worse decisions. He wrote that he never intended for your father to bear the blame, that events spiraled beyond his control." "Does that excuse what he did?" Alexander asked, though his tone held curiosity rather than anger. "No," Catherine said firmly, "but it explains it. He wasn't simply evil. He was weak and foolish, and weakness caused terrible harm. The distinction matters, I think." Alexander rose and walked to the window overlooking the gardens where his grandchildren played. "Your grandmother taught me that distinction 30 years ago. I'm glad you've learned it too." An hour later, the entire family gathered in the music room. 3 generations of Blackwoods and Ashfords, for Charlotte's brother's children, had also been invited, their presence a testament to the reconciliation Alexander and Charlotte had fostered over the decades. Alexander stood before them, Charlotte beside him, her hand resting in his with the comfort of 3 decades of partnership. "I asked you all here today because I wanted to share something," Alexander began. "Most of you know the story of how your grandmother and I met. You know about the anger I carried, the revenge I planned, the justice I sought." He paused, looking at each beloved face. "But what I want you to understand, what I need you to carry forward, is not just that love conquered hate. It's more complex and more important than that." Charlotte squeezed his hand and he continued. "Justice matters. Truth matters. My father deserved vindication, and the people Lord Ashford harmed deserved restitution. Your grandmother never asked me to abandon justice. She asked me to pursue it without becoming consumed by vengeance. Thomas leaned forward. And that's different because vengeance seeks to inflict maximum pain, Charlotte answered. Justice seeks to restore balance and prevent future harm. One destroys the person pursuing it. The other preserves their humanity while still holding wrongdoers accountable. Alexander nodded. Your grandmother saved me from becoming a man who achieved justice but lost his soul in the process, and in doing so, she gave all of you the gift of a family not defined by hatred, but by healing. Young Elizabeth spoke up. Grandmother, when you realized grandfather intended to destroy your father, were you afraid of him? Charlotte considered carefully. I was afraid of what his anger might do to him more than what it might do to me. I saw a good man in danger of losing himself to justified but ultimately destructive rage, and I thought, if I could show him another way, perhaps we could both be saved. And were you? Elizabeth asked. Charlotte and Alexander exchanged a look that held 30 years of shared joys and sorrows, challenges overcome and love deepened. We were, they answered together. As evening fell and the family dispersed to various activities, Alexander and Charlotte found themselves alone again in the music room. Charlotte returned to the pianoforte, and Alexander sat in his customary chair, just as they had done thousands of times before. Do you ever regret it? Alexander asked the question he had posed many times over the years, always receiving the same answer, but always needing to hear it again. Never, Charlotte replied, beginning to play. Do you? Never, Alexander echoed. Though I sometimes wonder what my younger self would think if he could see us now, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carry both Blackwood and Ashford blood, living in peace and prosperity, built not on revenge, but on reconciliation. I think he would be astonished, Charlotte said softly. And then perhaps he would be grateful that a young woman playing a nocturne had the courage to challenge his certainties. I think he would fall in love with her all over again, Alexander replied, just as I do every single day. The music filled the room, the same melody that had bridged the gap between enemies and created the foundation for an extraordinary love. And as the last notes faded into silence, Alexander and Charlotte sat together in the gathering dusk, two souls who had transformed anger into love, vengeance into mercy, and scandal into a legacy of healing that would endure for generations to come. The end. Dear beloved listeners, if the tale of Alexander and Charlotte has touched your heart, we would be deeply honored if you would subscribe to Echoes of Romance, leave a comment sharing your thoughts about this story of love and redemption, and give this video a like. Please activate your notifications so you never miss our next romantic tale. Until we meet again, may your own lives be filled with the kind of love that heals, the kind of courage that transforms, and the kind of mercy that redeems. Thank you for listening, and may you always find light even in the darkest of circumstances.